Welcome everybody to our discussion of Sefer Tfunos. This week we're going to do another application of another class on the application of Hekashim, or syllogisms, since it's a topic that's subtle and also is a topic that is the foundation of a lot of Gemaras. A lot of learning comes out of the syllogism, because the syllogism is a productive mechanism. You start with a statement, and you can then produce a lot of different halachas. Welcome.
It's Yankee. How are you? Good luck.
Hi, Yankee. Good luck. We're starting as usual without just orientation, and we said that. The Ramchal has told us to convert things, or to abstract what's happening in the Mishnah or the Gemara into 3 steps. You always have to say, what is the statement? What is the statement being presented? Okay, that means Havanas Mamorim. Okay, over here, and usually Mishnayos are usually statements. They're usually cases and laws. And we said that statements have to be analyzed according to what their subjects are, what they're speaking about, what you're saying about them, their predicates. Oops, someone's got a lot of noise back there. Yankee, is that you with the okay, good. Okay, so we said statements are the foundation of all our learning. Most of the Mishnayos are statements. Sometimes the Mishnayos is our classic case that we're using in Baba Kama has a mas and matan in it, but mostly Mishnayos is the case in laws. And it's the Gemara that does the analysis of the Mishnayos. So we said the first thing you have to do is understand what's being said. What's the subject of a discussion, and what are we saying about it? The second thing we have to do is we have to analyze what type of statement is being said. We said there's 11 types of predication. Is it a simple statement? Is it a statement of comparison? Is it a statement anafal pi or lefikach, etc.? The third thing that we have to do is we have to understand how this statement relates to other statements. That's a very important move. When we have contradictions, it means that our statement is contradictory, at least partially or completely, to another statement. And that's called archea memory. Also, when statements are going to be used in syllogisms, we're going to speak about them. So we're going to build by saying that this statement is a cube of another statement. I think, Yankee, someone's got a lot of noise back there. So if we can, looks like there's construction happening. It's going to be bothering people listening. Okay. Okay. So we said that the next tool in understanding statements is to arrange a statement with another statement, called archei mamarim. Said in our Mishnah, for instance, we think that the two statements, which are really 2 cases, are similar, which will run into a problem of Peshita, why do we have to say it? And then we're going to say, no, they're not similar. They're really Nivdal, we're talking about different cases, and therefore I have to write both of them. Okay, and the last part of the discussion of statements was based on understanding Diyukim. And Diyukim, we said there were Mukhrachim and Bilti Mukhrachim ones, and we mentioned that most of our learning is going to be with the Diyukim that are not the mathematical ones that are built on the statement, but are built because of the nuance and understanding of the language. Okay. Okay, that was our discussion of statements. Then we moved on to the discussion of syllogisms. Okay, fancy word for Hekashim. Now, Hekashim, Hekesh means that you take a statement, and you're able to give birth, so to speak, to other statements from your original statement. And we said this is the workhorse of learning. We use Hekation when we're trying to bring kashas. We use Hekation when we're trying to bring proofs. So it's a real dynamic aspect of learning. So Ramchal explained there's really only 5 Hekation. And he explained the classic one is called the Mofti, which is based on a categorical statement. An all statement. Whenever I say any all statement, so anything that's included in it and in the subject of all is certainly going to have the predicate. That's called the Mofti. Anything that's also, by the way, associated in truth and the predicate will be associated with all the prophet in that statement if it's an all statement. So that was the Mofti, the classical one. We said we're going to give examples in a little while. The second statement, the second type of Hekesh, we said, was built on the comparative statement. When two things are similar, if two subjects are similar, and we know the predication of one subject, or the law in the case of one subject, so then we can say that that law has to exist in the second subject because it's similar to the first. And we said a variation on the comparative Hekesh is the Kal V'chomer. Not only the two subjects are similar, but the unknown subject is either greater or lesser than the known subject, and therefore we can derive its halacha through that comparison. The third type of Hekesh, and we'll be explaining these, of course, in more detail, is based on the Hekesh Tolui, the if A then B statement, and it's used by showing that A is true and therefore B must be true, or A is false and therefore, B is false and therefore A must be false also. That's called a Hekesh Tolui. And the last type of statement that creates a syllogism is called the Machalek, the Hekesh Machalek. That means that we describe a set of possible predicates, for instance, A, B, or C, and we affirm one, and then therefore we can deny the other two, or we deny two, and we can then affirm the one that's remaining. That's called the Hekesh Machalek. Okay, so really the idea of Derek Tfunos is that the Ramchal has put together a very small and exhaustive group of items that make up the learning process. So when you look at the whole chart in and of itself, you say, oh, there's all these little pieces around. But when you analyze each piece and master them, you realize that he's really condensed the learning process into 3 major categories. That means defining statements, producing Hekation, and then, as Hashem, next week we'll be talking about proving and what's called proof and disproof, is proving the statements true or false by bringing various types of proofs. So when you realize there's really only 3 things that your mind is doing when you're learning, that means you're understanding what's being said, you're producing photos, results from what's being said, or you're proving what's being said. So those are the 3 basic categories, and they have their details, which when you think about them, are very, very simple. And what the Ramchal has done for us is made a toolkit of the various subcategories of these 3 basic forms of thinking. And therefore, when we're handling any text, we should be able to analyze them and to say, okay, what's happening here is a Hekesh. Which type of Hekesh or what's happening is a Mofti? And how can I prove that this, or how does the Gemara prove this Hekesh is correct or incorrect? And by bringing these tools to our conscious mind, then we're able to see very, very clearly what the Gemara is doing, analyze the Gemara, and then be very, very clear about our understanding and our ability also to teach. So that's the Mareches. It's not difficult because each piece is very, very logical and sound, and it's already built in our subconscious way of thinking, in our natural way of thinking. And what the Ramchal has done is made this whole process into a limited group of possibilities and brought it to our consciousness. And for that, we owe him a great Yosher Koyach. Okay, so now we're going to do another class of examples, because these topics, as I have mentioned, can remain in the abstract level, and as an abstraction they sound very nice, but if we don't have the application, so then we really haven't gained from the Ramchal at all, because his whole concept is to bring the learning process from the abstract to the concrete. That's our job. We have to now integrate this material into a useful and beneficial tool, which it is. Okay, I'm going to close the chart, and we're going to open up our chapter here in Derech Tefunos. Now, what I've done here is I've integrated the text of Derech Tefunos in with some examples. Now, last week, helping my wife there in her little activities in Mishmach magazine, we went to see how honey is made. Honey, great topic, because Rosh Hashanah is coming up. We're going to be dipping our apple in honey. So the big problem with honey is, if you ever thought about it, is that it comes from a animal, a bee. So how can we be dipping our wonderful apple into honey? Honey should be treif. If I gave you a glass of camel milk, would you drink it? Well, you wouldn't drink it, because it comes from a treif animal, so it's treif. So how come we have this wonderful minhag of dipping our apple into honey? Ever think of that? Okay, that was that problem last week. So when I looked up the Gemara, I found there's a classic Hekesh Mofti being used to prove that we can eat honey. The Gemara had the problem. So let's see how the Gemara did that. But before we do that, let's just go back and review what the Ramchal said. He said, Teva Hisbanunis Nelson, the very nature of thinking tells us, or gives us, Kashir Yoma Nasu Echa Benose Echa. When you say, when you give a certain predication to a subject, you say a subject has some aspect, you define some aspect of a subject. Then, kol ma nichlal on the schaba emes lenasu hahu. Then anything that's included in that predication or associated with that predication, nichlal on the schaba, it's either included because you can say it's a subcategory of the predicate, or it's something that's associated with the predicate. So then, of course, it has to be true of that subject. Yoma also no say. Similarly, kol ma shenichlal ba'oso no say. Anything that's included in the subject, Yoma ba'oso no say, will have to be true. Will have to be said about that predicate. The Nikra Hekesh Mofti. This is called the classical solution, and he gave the example of Kol Osei Av Malacha B'Shabbos Chayav Misa. There's a categorical statement. Kol, everyone that does an Av Malacha on Shabbos will predicate to that person that he's Chayav Misa, is Chayav Misa, yes, death penalty. Havara Av Malacha. Once we know that Havara is in the category of an Av Malacha, so then I'll say Havara is going to be Chayav Misa. That's the classical syllogism based on a all statement. Okay, so let's get back to our B's. Let's get back to our B's. First, we'll read the Gemara inside a little, and then we'll abstract it. Meisvei, the Gemara asks a kasha. We won't get into the kasha exactly, but here's the question. Mipnei ma omru davash devorim mutar. Why do we say that honey from bees is mutar? Well, why shouldn't it be mutar? Well, it comes from a treif insect called a bee. So how can we be eating that delicious honey? By the way, and don't tell me that it says in Eretz Zavat Chalav U'Davash that Israel is a land flowing with milk and honey, because that honey over there is talking about honey from dates. Right? So there's no proof on that. So this honey that we're eating, hey, wait a minute, it's like eating, if I give you a glass of milk, as I said, from a treif animal, from a gamal, from a camel, you say, wait a minute, that's treif. So how come you're having such a good time, and we're having such a good time, or all Klal Yisrael's having a good time on Rosh Hashanah, dipping that honey, not to mention all the other great cookies and drinks that are based on it. So the Gemara has that problem. So it says, "Mipnei shemachnisot oso legufan ve'ein memotzot osan migufan." The first answer is because it brings things into its body, but it doesn't exude things from its body. Well, what does that mean? Rashi explains. We'll just say it outside. We know that the bee flies around and he sticks his nose into the flowering, the blossoming petals. And in the bottom of that petal is nectar. Hashem, in his great wisdom, made the bee run into the nectar, and then he shakes the pollen and he pollinates the flower. So it's good for the bee, it's good for the flower. But the bee is really taking the nectar from the center of the flower into his body, and there's special honey sacs, believe it or not, the special honey sacs that he holds this pollen inside. And then he flies back to his nest, and he, not so nice, but he regurgitates what he picked up in the flower and drops it into his hive. So since it doesn't come from his body, as the camel's milk comes from the camel himself. It's the blood turns into milk, a very, very miraculous process, but that really is from the camel itself. But this, the bee is only collecting an external product called nectar and bringing it into his nest. Not good. So we had the kasha. We won't get into who the Omer of Yaakov, the Omer Dufsha Rahman Sharve. Who Omer? Excuse me. The answer is going to be this particular person is not basing himself on this svara, but he's basing himself on what Rav Yaakov said about Dufsha. Rav Yaakov said that honey is permitted. Why? The Tanya. Rav Yaakov Omer. It says in the pasuk, "Ach et ze tochelu mikol sheretz ha'of." When the pasuk, I believe it's Vayikra, says, "These are the things that you may eat from all the shvatzim harov." Shvatzim harov are these flying insects. And it goes and explains to us exactly what type of little grasshoppers and locusts that you can eat. Okay, we lost the Masara. Some people say they still have the Masara. But whatever it is, that's what it says. It says, these are the ones of the flying insects you could eat. So the Gemara says, a diuk, an inference. Zu ata ochel, v'hi ochel sheretz ha'of tameh. So it says these ones, certain types of grasshoppers, whatever certain has the legs above its wings, those are the ones you can eat, meaning others you can't eat. So the Gemara has a problem. Sheretz ha'of tameh v'hedjikasi. Why did it have to say these are the ones you can eat, as opposed to the other ones you can't eat? The other ones that you can eat are, it's a clear plastic that you can't eat, shvatzim ha'of. Ella, so it says because we have this extra duplicity. In other words, it says the same thing twice, one from the Diuk and one from the Forish Pasuk. The Gemara, according to Rabbi Yaakov, learns, Sheretz ha'ov tamei, Ella, Sheretz ha'ov tamei, iyata ochel. The sheretz itself, which flies around, you can't eat. Aval ata ochel mash ha'ov tamei mashritz. But you can eat what the little flying bug is mashritz, what it exudes. The ezezo, is that the Vash Dvarim? This is the Vash Dvarim. So that's the Gemara. He says we have a Gezeres HaKasel that tells us that the bug itself, the flying bug itself, you can't eat, but what comes out of the bug you can eat. So it wasn't so easy to matir your dipping your honey in the Davash this Rosh Hashanah, but we did it. So let's recast what's being said in the Gemara in the form of the classic syllogism. Okay? So we had this statement in the Mishnah, by the way, that says, Hayotze min hatame tame. The Mishnah, that was before this little Shaklavataria, said, Hayotze min hatame tame. Anything that comes out of a tame object, an animal, or in our case, an insect, anything that comes out of some living thing that's tame, it itself is tame. That's what the Mishnah said. Now, the Ramchal warned us, or pointed out to us, that even though the word kol is not stated in a stami statement, in a simple statement, it means all. Like in this case, it really means all things that come out of a tame animal is tame. So if that's the rule that we learn in the Mishnah, and on that basis we're going to say that Campbell's milk is out. Okay, so if that's true, we have a simple, first of all, we have a simple Hekesh Mofti. We say like this, first we need a substitution. Devarim Tamei. Are bees Tamei? Yes. So let's put it together. If Kol Yotze Min Tamei Tamei and Devarim are Tameim, these are Tamei, what comes out? Hayotze Min Devarim Tameim, correct? Simple Hekesh Mofti. You with me? All things come out of a Tamei item, that's a subject, a Tamei themselves. Devarim is in the klal of, excuse me.
Devarim.
He's a Tamei item, okay? So then everything that comes out of a bee should be Tamei. Kol, very nice. Now we'll get the second syllogism. Through our substitution. Hayotze min devarim Tamei. That's what we just proved, that everything that comes out of the bee should be Tamei. Dvash is Yotze min devarim. Dvash comes out of the bee. So therefore, Dvash should be Tamei. Boom, no eating, no dipping on Rosh Hashanah. Perfectly logical, correct?
Yes.
Nothing wrong with the logical. It's all based on Hekesh Mofti. Okay, how do we solve the problem? So the Gemara offers two solutions to the problem. One is we're going to have to say that one of these two premises are wrong. Now, we can't say Hayotze min devarim devarim is wrong, because if we say that, so we're going to have to deny that bees are tamei, and that we can't do because that's an open pasuk. But what can we do? The second premise that honey comes out of the devarim. Well, how can you deny that? I mean, our eyes see that it comes out. So the first answer to the Gemara is you have to make a distinction between different things that come out of an insect. When we said the statement, everything that comes out of a tummy is tummy, we talked about things that were created by the tummy animal. But the bee doesn't create anything. He just goes around collecting his nectar and carries it to the nest. Okay. So some people have the problem because in modern day science, you know, they see that there's something called enzymes, which are not apparent to the eye. And those enzymes, what the bee does to break down the pollen into the honey form that we have it. However, that's not very big kasha because the material that's really being used is nectar. And these enzymes are just taking things that the externals working on external things. But okay, we have big problems because when it comes to cheese and all sorts of things, and rennet, if it comes from a trace animal, it may cause the tree, and we have a whole big balagan. Okay, but according to the second answer, we admit the fact that honey comes out of the Tomei animal, the bee. And we don't make any distinctions. It's exuded from the animal, pushut. And what we do say is, even though the conclusion is that honey should be Tomei, comes along the Torah and specifically permits it through Gezeres HaKasser. So in logic, through all our rules of logic, Hechlet Mofti, honey should be not permitted. But because, and that's exactly why the Torah stated this limud to make honey permitted, because logically it should be not permitted. So we have specific. So in that case, we wouldn't have to worry about any way that the bee intervened in making the honey. It doesn't interest us. Okay. So here we see an application of the Hekesh Mofti. We had a general rule, and we've seen how that we can end up with a kasha, and how we can retard the kasha by changing one of the premises. Either we deny one of the premises and we say that honey is not the Yotzi Minatame that we're talking about, by creating two different types of Yotzi Minatame, a svara, or we can say logically you're 100% correct, but comes along the Torah and specifically wrote a lima to deny that conclusion that you would have made, and to mock to something that really is Tomei. You will see this type of learning constantly throughout your learning of Gemara, okay? Where we have a classical syllogism leads to a result. The result, the only way that we can deny the result is by going back and denying one or both of the premises. And if we can't deny one or both of the premises, so then we're going to have to mechadesh a pasuk against it, because we only have two sources of learning. This is stated very clearly in the Darkei Gemara. We either learn from logic, like in this case, or we learn from Gezeres HaKasser, which means that the Torah is mahapeka, our normal logic, is saying what you would derive logically. The Torah is saying, even though it's a logical conclusion, we are, Hashem is saying, no, don't do that. Like in this case, even though it's a logical conclusion that we should not be able to eat honey, honey is permitted. Now, by the way, when we went to the farm, the bee farm, so there's actually more problems in the honey. There's more problems in honey than I ever thought about. For instance, when they open up the beehive, when they bring the hives back, they have this machine that has this hot knife that cuts the wax of the honeycomb. Now, the wax of the honeycomb is made from the body of the bee, and is not made from the nectar. So how come it doesn't trafe up that knife that's cutting it, and then the tom goes into the knife, and then it trafes up all the honey? So the answer is that the wax is not food, and therefore cannot be trafed. It's expalma. Even though it comes from the bee, it has no taste, and it cannot be digested as food, so it doesn't make anything trafe. What about the bee parts? If a bee gets sick or he falls in, now let's talk about the bees themselves. So how come we don't worry that there's little bees left around inside the honey? So there, the very nice farmer told us what they do in a beehive is they actually separate it into two parts with a screen separating the top with the bottom, except with a little hole in it. What does this little hole in the screen do? It's big enough for the worker bees to go to the second story upstairs and create honey, but the queen bee that lays the eggs is larger than the honeybees, and it can't go to the second story. So it has to lay its eggs in the bottom, where the worker bees give the queen enough food, honey to live, and all the little babies to be born. But any sherrits that the queen bee, any bugs that the queen bee creates, which is Varietrafe, never gets to the upper floor because the queen bee can never fly up to lay her eggs. Okay, so we see that when we get to the halachic aspect of, in this case, honey, our basic hekesh mofti, which should make everything that comes out of the bee treif, is going to cause us a lot of problems. Okay, and it's really only the honey that's mutter, and we're going to have to figure out why all the other problems are no problems. Like what about if there's a little Tosfos talks about it, so a bee, a leg of a bee gets caught in there. It's not a barrier, so it will be part of it. Okay, but it's all based really on this learning of why a bee is us. For instance, a very interesting problem about it's called the queen's food. They call it royal jelly in English. Royal jelly, the bees make special food for the queen. Now that is not honey. What happens is they take this food for the queen, which is very, very nutritious. The queen has to do a lot of work. She creates all the babies in the beehive. It's very nutritious, but it comes from the bee itself, and it does not come from the pollen. They mix it with honey, and then they give it to people. So that's not included in this Gezeres HaKosov. Gezeres HaKosov only includes the Lashachar, not anything that comes from the animal itself. So there's a big machlokas about it, and the Badat's Aser royal jelly. It's a good thing to know. The Rabbanut in Israel says it's okay. They have a head of the Tzitz Eliyahu, Posek in the last generation, adopted it. But we see that from the general rule and the general syllogism, we're going to have to make distinctions in order to make any part of this process kosher. Then they do a filtering process, and it was very, very fascinating. But everything's based on this hekesh mofti. And when you abstract it, you can clearly see what premise is being denied. And there'll be nafkaminas between these two ways of handling. Okay?
Why is it a nesve if it should be a she'ela, no?
Okay, that I didn't want to get into the whole Gemara.
Okay.
I didn't want to get into the whole Gemara because it's a little too complex for us. Okay, so I just started at this point. That's a good question. You can go into the Gemara itself. It's not so long, but it was a conclusion of Rav Yosef, and according to what Rav Yosef said, the first question would have been a problem. Okay, so that's why I just cut out a small part of the Gemara, but you'd have to plug it back into the whole thing, which can be used. Okay, so that's the hekesh mofti, one of the basic workhorses. Now, Od B'Tevis bonus, the second type we're going to discuss is the hekesh that's built on a binyan av or a mamet single. Okay, a one-through comparison, the comparative, the Medam statement. So Od B'Tevis bonus, who shahad domin yu'abdu. We say that similar subjects can teach each other, one from the other. What does that mean? He's going to explain it. If we see two similar subjects, and we see a predication, in that case it's going to be a din, in one of the two doming cases. So the din, himotz and asu, So then we must find, logically, that that same predication will be found in the second case. Even though it's not stated specifically in the second case, but since the second case is similar to the first case, and the first case we know, so through the Hekesh Madama, we're going to bring it over. Now, although the Ramchal doesn't say it here, I'd like to make a note, which I didn't make last week, about two cases being similar. This is a note also brought from the Darkei Gemara. There's two ways that we can say things are similar. There's one through logic. The two subjects are similar through logic, as we're going to discuss in one moment. But sometimes there's a kosov again. The Torah puts the two things together, even though there's no logical reason to put it together. So if the Torah puts it together, it has a very powerful force, actually unbreakable force. You can't say that they're not dome because a certain aspect, because they never started off dome and they put it together. Let me give you an example. How do we know that a woman can be married with a document? Okay, we know that the Mishnah says, "Ha'isha nichnas bekesef shtar and bia," the first Mishnah in Kedushin, right? A woman is married with kesef, money. That's why we give the name shtar. You can give her shtar. It says Hayat Mikdash Li, or with bia. Those are the three ways. Now, the Gemara wants to know, how do we know that she can be married with bia? So it makes a hekesh, because the pasuk says v'yotzei v'hais. When talking about Kedushin, it says v'yotzei v'haisel isha acher, that she goes out from this husband who get the hayasa, and she goes in. She gets married, the hayasa the isha acher, to another person. So the Torah puts together divorce and marriage in the context of gittin. She shall go out with a get, and she shall be married again. And because it put these two items next to each other, so we learn through a Gezer Shava that the two mechanisms are equal. Now, there's no logical reason why the two cases, marriage and divorce, should be similar. But through the mechanism of the Gezer Shava again, the Torah put the two things together. So sometimes the hekesh, what we call here the middle term, the dimion between two cases is not from logic, but it's Gezer Shava. Okay? So in one hand, it's weaker because it's not based on logic. On the other hand, you can't deny it because the Torah says so. Just like we had the case of honey. If in logic, honey should be treif, and the Torah says yes, so the Torah says yes, what are you going to do? It's an exception to it. Okay? So when we make these Madama cases, when we compare two cases, we have to be conscious of that, because if they're logical comparisons, we can use logic to break it. If it's a Gezer Shava, the Torah puts it together, then logic, of course, is not going to break it. It's never based on logic in the first place. So that's a little important note that you'll see as you learn. So that was the second type of hekesh is learned through comparison. When we said the two cases are equal and something is mafarish in one case, then through binyan or mamatzinu, we're going to exploit the second one. So we gave that case in our classic discussion that we've been using, which is Bava Kama. Shor hamazik is chayiv. Ma v'hamazik don't know shor hamazik. So ma v'hamazik should be chayiv through dinyan. What we always have to do when we make a dimion is define on what basis these two cases are similar. Okay? And we brought Rashi to spell out this comparison. Now, since the comparison is based on a logical comparison between the two, the dimion, the comparison, has to be a meaningful comparison. Okay, you can't say Shor and Mava are similar because they're both talking about living things. That wouldn't be enough to compare it. It would be enough to break up the syllogism later on, but just saying the two things are alive because one is high, the other is not really strong enough reason. Okay, so the what we call the factor or the tam that makes these two similar are very, very, very important when we make a logical opinion on or monosyllable, because that is the weak link in the Hekesh. So all we have to do is show that they're not similar in a significant way, and then the result will fall down. Okay, but in constructing it is always based on the similarity of two cases. Shor Hamazik is Chayav, Mab Hamazik is Domo Shor Hamazik, therefore Mab Hamazik should be Chayav. Okay, that simple Hekesh, of course, we said, is going to lead us to a very difficult kasha, because if I can learn Mab Hamazik from Shor Hamazik, so then why did the Torah say it explicitly? The Torah never repeats itself. Remember, we said Peshita by Kamashma. We don't allow the Torah to say the same thing twice. So here, the Torah, if something can be derived logically, the Torah doesn't have to say it. It says Svara Lam Likro. If I can derive something logically through Svara, in this case through a Hekesh Mamatzinu, so then Lam Likro, what does the Torah have to write? It's a waste of time. So the Mishnah is going to break it up. We said the Achilles heel, so to speak, of a Dimion is always its comparison. And then the Mishnah says we can find a significant difference between the two cases. And since we could find a significant difference between the two cases, the Torah was forced to write the second case. So that was the Binyan of Mamatzina. What we find here in case A can we move to case B through a Dimion. We said a variation on a Mamatzina is called a Kal V'chomer, where the two subjects are not only doming, but they share a relationship as one is more chomer, one is more strict than the other one. There's more reason to say that then you should apply. Not only is through equality, but it's even greater. So definitely it's not only equal to, but greater than, and therefore the din should follow accordingly. So we gave an example from Baba Kama. We said that bor is pachot chamor, it's less chamor than shame. Why? Because the bor is aimed after lelek lahazik. The bor doesn't have the quality of going out to do damage. It's a passive damager. Someone actually falls into the bor. It doesn't go out and attack anyone, damages them. So if the bor, which is a passive damager, the Torah is machayev, so the shame, for instance, when an animal goes out and walks in another person's field and eats up his crops, so since he's mobile, it's even more reason why he should be chayev. So if shame is moving, there's more reason to be chayev because he's mobile, because he's dark and lay-like so he can go out. So then shame, all the more so, should be chayev. So if I have bor written in the Torah, why do I need shame? If a bor, which is passive, is chayev, so certainly an active damager is even more reason to be chayev. So again, we have the same problem. Swallow on really crow. If we can learn something through, in this case, about the why is the Torah have to write explicitly? And that will be the basis of the unstated kasha in the Mishnah. So that's learning Dimion. Now the Ramchal explains how to destroy a Mamatzin or a Kal V'chomer. Excuse me 1 second. He says like this. V'hine im timsa shahanosim shechashavta hios domim, ain't no domim be'emes, tivatel hatolda. If you find that the subjects that you thought were comparable are really not comparable, so then you're going to break the Mamatzinu or the Kal V'chomer and destroy the result. So let's give an example. We said that regular Hamasik is chayev, very nice, and Shane Hamasik. The Mishnah says Shor and Mava, so we're just going to, it's not focus exactly what Shor and Mava is. So according to Shmuel, the Mava is Shane, and according to the conclusion of the Gemara, the Shor is regular. Okay, so if you do a substitution, it says regular Hamasik is chayev, that's the Shor. and the Shane, which is the Mava Hamazik, is Doma to Regel Hamazik. So through a Mamatzino, Shane Hamazik has to be Chayav. If Shane Hamazik has to be Chayav, we said, so why does the Torah have to explicitly write Shane Hamazik? Svara, Mamadi Krav. If I can learn something through logic, a Mamatzino, what do I need the pasuk to go out and write it? It's mutar, it's extra. Torah has no extra. Just like you don't have extra fingers, you don't have extra words in the Torah cases. So the way that our Mishnah is going to destroy this Mamatzino is by denying, of course, the Achilles heel, the link between Shane and between Shane and Regel. And it says, Lo Hari Ashur, which we're learning according to Shmuel is Regel, Hamazik, Kahare Ha-Mavo, which is Shane Hamazik. What you thought was comparable are not. Therefore, we can no longer, since that middle premise is broken, so therefore Mava, which is Shane Hamazik, should not be Chayav, and therefore we need a pasuk. And we can't say it's Mutar anymore. So we broke the middle premise that was based on Dimion, and therefore the result changed. We can no longer say Mava is Chayav, and that's why we need the pasuk. We said what's left out of this Mishnah is the reason why Regel and Shane are considered Doma, the factor why the two cases are considered comparable, and on what basis are they not comparable. Okay? And last week we brought Rashi, who clearly fills out those important gaps. Okay? The Shane, we thought, is a mazik. What's the difference if my animal does damage by eating your crops or by stamping on it? Okay. Regel wasn't meant specifically for the case of Regel. There's a lower quality in Regel. Regel is an example, a classical case of an animal destroying another person's property. And therefore, any time that there's destruction by your animal, you should have to pay. So if Regel and Masik is chayav, just means when your animal goes out to do damage, it's chayav. So Shane is equivalent to it, and therefore should also be chayav, and I wouldn't need a pasuk. Comes along the Mishnah says it's not true. There's a certain quality that you may have broken up the dimming between Shane and Regel. Regel is Haziku Matsui. It's always doing damage as it walks. And Shane is not Haziku Matsui. He doesn't eat all the time. Sometimes it eats. So maybe you'd think that Regel is more Chomer, because since it's always walking and always trampling over things, we said that's why you would say that Torah is Machaya, because it's a clear and present danger. Whereas Shane happens certain times, the Torah is not Machaya on that. So I couldn't definitely learn Shane from Regel. So when we map this out in its premises and conclusions, we're able to very clearly see what the Gemara, what the problem of the Mishnah was, and how it solved it. And of course, we needed the Gemara and Rashi and the Fortune to fill in the missing blanks. But we ourselves know that there must be, once you understand the structure, that Gimyon is based on a tam, on a factor, so then you must fill in on what basis are the two cases similar and on what basis are they not. And once we consciously know that that's our job, then we can fill in the important blanks, as Reb Soloveitchik will show this one of saying, spelling it out. We could spell out the important missing elements, and then we could see the deal and why the Mishnah really had to bring up this important Shakla Targa, because it looks like you would need a second pasuk. And Hashem, through our conscious learning of the Ramchal, we just master these simple rules and we apply them in the cases that are in front of us. We're able to clearly predict what are the missing pieces and what was the difference between what we call the Habarina and the Skama, why two things are similar and why they're not similar. And then we're able to see the Chiddush of the Mishnah. Okay. So that's the first rule. The first rule is you're going to break a Mamatzino by showing that the two cases that you thought were similar are not similar. When we have a Kal V'chomer, then our job is to show that It's true that one case is more strict than the other in one aspect, but in another aspect, if I could show you that it's not more strict, so then again, the result will not be mukhrah. It could be, but not be mukhrah. We need, in order to say Svar Lam Likro, that we could learn something through logic, the logic that we have to learn always has to be mukhrah. Or else, if it's filthy mukhrah, we'll say, the Torah came to write its pasuk because you would have some sort of doubt whether logic, whether you should form that logical syllogism or not. Okay, I'm saying things very, very quickly, but they're very important. So they're things that have to be thought about. Okay. Let's see about this Kal V'chomer. The Gemara is going to say that we can make a Kal V'chomer, not a dimion, as we said, between Shein and Regel, but the Gemara is going to posit that we can make a Kal V'chomer from bor to Shein. Why? Let's spell it out. The bor is less chamor than the Shein. Why? Because Shein V'altim Regel has to be said. And the Torah, if it would write that the bor is chayiv, so then we should be able to make a kol shekain to the Shein. The Shein is yoter chamor. Why? Because it's active. It's an active damager. So if a passive damager is chayiv, certainly an active damager should be chayiv. Kol shekain, it should be chayiv. Correct? If that's true, we have a terrible problem. The Torah is writing a pasuk about Shein that needs to be written. Smara, lama, the. If I have a logical derivation, I don't need a pasuk. So the Gemara is going to break that Kal V'chomer. How does it do it? Because it finds that in another aspect, bor is more chomer than the Shein. How? Bor is yoter chomer because it has a quality of techilat esyato omer l'nesek. We said that the bor, by nature, is a damager. From the minute you make a bor, you make something that can hurt someone. Whereas an animal, sometimes it wanders to another field, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it eats, in this case Shein, sometimes it eats, sometimes it doesn't. Don't all person will not eat. So sometimes it doesn't, it just sits in its corral, it's a nice little baby. So even though it has the potential to go out and do damage, in reality, it doesn't have to. But a boar, by its very existence, is already, it has everything necessary, it doesn't have to go anywhere, it's already set to do damage. Okay, so we build the boars, shoots around it. So it's a dangerous sign by definition. So on that aspect, if the bor is yoter chomer because it has techilas sitzon and nezik, it's chayiv. So I would say the Shein, and that doesn't have that terrible aspect. Shein techilas sitzon omer nezik. So the Shein should not be chayiv. I could not definitely derive the Shein from the bor. So I destroyed the relationship of bor b'Shein and the Kal V'chomer with another aspect showing the Shein is more chomer than bor. Very good. So that's the second way that we can destroy the Kal V'chomer. Or the binyan now, we just have to destroy the dimion. The Kal V'chomer, we're going to have to destroy the relationship of pachas yoter Kal V'chomer. Now the third one is very, 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 very interesting. The third one is just going to remove the hechrach of the Kal V'chomer. Let's get into that. The im timsa no say acher doma lenose hanidon she'ein lo hanasiyahu tivato atova. This is a very, very interesting way of destroying a Kal V'chomer or a binyan. We say that we're always going to learn from the given case to the case which is similar to it. Okay, let's say the given case is A. It has a certain din. So anything done with A will have the same din. Now what happens if I find case C, which is done with the case B, and it doesn't have the din? The Torah says, no, I'm sorry, it doesn't have the din. So since I found a case that's similar to the case that we're trying to derive, that doesn't have the suspected din, we can no longer say definitely that the unknown case should have the derived din. Let's take a case and spell it out. We said that bor is yoter chamor. We just finished saying it's more. There's more reason to mechayev a bor than there is a shame. Why? Because from its inception, it's a damager. It's called techilat, shetechilat slato omid lenezik. From its very inception, it's a damager. So something that's not a damager from its inception, just when it's born, it doesn't have to be a damager. It takes a lot of activity in order for it to come to the state of being a damage. So we said, not necessarily should be chayav. So the Torah had to write it. So we'll say it's not mukhrak the change should be chayav because it's really less dangerous than bor. Bor is what we call a clear and present danger. And for an animal eating is dangerous, but not by definition like the bor. So the Gemara later on is going to show us what we call the yochiev. We're going to find the case of Karen, which is similar to the case of Shem, and it's going to be chayav. Let's see. Karen is less dangerous also than bor. Why? Because the goring also, the animal is not, by its very nature, a damager. So Karen, the fact is that Karen, in logic, should also come out to be not chayav. Let's explain that. If we say that the factor that something doesn't have to feel sitzon lenezik should make it less reason to be chayav, and that's why we want the shame, it's not chayav. So Karen has the same factor that we said that Shane has. Karen also doesn't have the factor of and yet Karen is chayav. So we see that there's that we can no longer, once we have Karen as chayav, and it doesn't have that factor so we can no longer say that that's the reason why something is chayav. Or excuse me, it is not chayav, excuse me. You would say in logic, Karen should not be chayav because it's not season but we have a pasuk that says it is. If we have a pasuk that says it is, then we can no longer make a kal v'chomer. We can no longer say that because something is not season it's not chayav. So what we did was we took a case that was similar to our case. In this case, Karen is doma to shame. It has the same quality, but the expected law is different than what we thought in logic. So once the expected law is different than what we thought in logic, we can no longer use our logic to derive the din. So those are the three methods that the Ramchal has taught us how to break up this syllogism based on comparison. Either we have to break the comparison, or we have to show that another aspect that we thought was kal and chomer is not kal and chomer, or you have to bring another case which is equal to the case that we're trying to derive in logic and show that the Torah produces the opposite. Okay, and all those three ways, again, what we're saying here is not difficult to grasp. You can think about it and it makes perfect logical sense. But the difficulty here is to bring it to the level of consciousness. Ramchal says that in Sils Hashem too. The things that he says are not Kiddushin. His Kiddushin come, he says in the Derech also, in his ability to organize the material into a set of small rules that once you see them and master them, you're able to consciously apply your learning to what's going on in front of you and see clearly what the structure of the proof is and the structure of the disproof or the structure of the kasha. And that's the whole thing. Let's go to the next one. What I'm just really saying is that you just have to think about these things and you'll see that they're perfectly logical, and then apply them to the cases that are in front of you, like I did with the Vash. Okay. עוד בטבע הזמנות ששני עניינים שהם אחד קודם ואחד נמשך יכריחו זה את זה. The third type of Hekesh is based on the if-then statement, Hekesh Totally. So we said that if you have two subjects, she'echad mehem kodem ve'echad nimshach, one is the consequent of the other. Kodem means it's the precedent, fancy English, and nimshach means the consequent. So then, though, we will be forced to come to certain conclusions based on the fact that one is the cause of the other one. And here are the two rules that we have to think about in the if-thens. When you find the precedent, then you're going to find, perforce, the consequent. If I say when the sun comes up, the light appears, the daytime appears. So whenever I see the sun coming up, I should expect the light. If A, then B. A, the sun has risen, then it must be right. Okay. If it's raining, then the streets should be wet, because the streets being wet is a consequent of the rain that fell. If A, then B. But the exciting one is if I don't have the cause, excuse me, that's the wrong view. If I don't have the result, then I don't have the cause. If the streets are not wet, so it must mean that it's not raining. If the sky is not lit up, then I know the sun hasn't come up. So we abstract that in the form of A's and B's or S and B's, whatever you like. If A, then B. If it's raining, the streets are wet. A is true. Once I have A, then I know that B must be true. Okay. Now, if A, then B, if I know that B is not true, or B is not here, the streets are not wet, so it must be that since the result is not here, the cause is not here either. Okay. Now, finding a causal relationship is a lot of work. They've been trying to find the cause of cancer for at least 50 years. I keep trying to find it, and they can't seem to get it. If they can find the cause, and they can eliminate the cause, and you get the result. Okay. And they said we're going to break up these relationships by showing that it's not true that A causes B. Now, let's give a quick example that he gave.
Yeah, I think it's getting a little late. I'm starting to lose.
Oh, yeah. You're trying to use consciousness. Okay, well, okay. Chabal, I know we're going over this many times, but we just really need the practice. So maybe what I'm going to do next week, okay, which is very, very unusual, I'm going to start from this point. I'm not going to go back and do a review. We'll just finish off these two examples of the if-thens. I don't want to lose you because there's no such thing in the class. The if-then and the machalik. And then we're going to do the last part of the Pulas Seichel, which is showing on what basis some things are true. He's going to tell us when you want to prove something, where is the source? Someone once asked me, prove this, prove that there's a God. So I said to them, well, what would you accept as proof? Well, they didn't know what to answer. What do you accept as proof? But it's a very important issue we're going to be discussing next week after we do a quick, these last two occasion, is what is called proving something true. What is allowed as evidence to say logically that something is true or not. That's going to be the very important topic that we'll do last week after a quick review here. The way to get this stuff is only by doing a chazara. And as you do it, when you get a Gemara, stop. Say, what is going on here? What's the statement? What's the hekesh? How is it built? Where's the source of the comparison? Is it a comparison? It's not a comparison. bringing it to a conscious level. Okay, that's what it's all about. As I said, it's not difficult, but it requires bringing things which are done, quote unquote, subconsciously or naturally into a conscious level.
Thank you very much. It's Yankee Horowitz. How are you?
Hi, Yankee. How you doing?
Much appreciated. Did you see what I sent you in terms of...
Yeah.